worry about numbering. But that's enough. So today we'll finish up networking and talk a little bit about security. Do you have any questions about the assignment? About the programming assignment that you did working, that you may have been working on, that you could have been. Good. All right. A few people have been showing me about somewhere between half and 2/3 of assignment 3, and it looked pretty good. Do you have any questions about it? For those people who've been showing me things, they'll be finished. A few days, I think. All right, good. So computer networks, to finish up the things we were discussing on networking, you have usually some nodes which can be connected to each other through some kind of local area network. Local area networks don't require much sophistication in things like finding where your recipient is, or finding, so the issue about addresses is not really that critical for local area networks. They can be pretty simple. So examples of local area networks come from Bluetooth, or Zigbee, or Salute. Your remote controls your TV. People still have TVs. Really? No TVs? No. Because everyone watches stuff on their, on their embedded glasses. These. Okay. But you don't have one of those embedded things that you can wear and watch TV. You can get one in, what's it, 3 days. 3 days there's going to be these fantastic sales. They're giving away almost everything. And the economy needs you to go out and spend as much money as you can. Go out and spend money. Wait in long lines. Get irritated. And if you don't want to do it, then you can do it sometime in the next few months, I guess, few weeks. So local area networks, the issue about finding the next node, finding the next hop, is not very difficult. Addresses don't have to be very difficult. You can just kind of sequentially number things 1, 2, 3, 4. Give them names. And again, you can have local area networks that are both wired and examples of small area wired networks, so that's Ethernet. And there used to be things like token rings. There was a ring that was kind of like Ethernet. It was a formation where every node was connected to the next, the adjacent nodes. So these are wired, and then there's wireless. These are pretty useful for your home network or for small geographical areas. They don't scale very well to larger things. Ethernet has definite limitations about how far you can stretch a wire. Maybe half a mile or something like that. Maybe a little bit more. And wireless even less. So to get to greater distances, you've got to go to different technologies. There are lots of other technologies. There's satellites. and there are undersea cables and things like that. Just to briefly describe, do you know how satellites work? Communication satellites? So there's planet. We're not interested in two. Yes? Yeah, I don't know what that was, but that was a good description, whatever that. This planet, we won't consider other planets. We put things in orbit around the planet, and there are a few different ways to do this. You can put things in a very high orbit so that it reaches a very large amount of the surface of the planet, of Earth, and those things appear to be in the same position all the time. Those are called geosynchronous orbits. And geosynchronous orbits are things like broadcast TV and there's a whole bunch of these geosynchronous orbit satellites. There's hundreds of these things. I guess now a few thousand. But they appear to be in the same position, and they're pretty far away. The problem is that they're pretty far away, so that if you want to use it for voice, the delay between sending something to the satellite and getting it back is pretty large. So for voice things, it's really irritating. You'll notice if you're speaking on one of these things that there's this few hundred millisecond delay when you say something and before you get a response. So because of that and a few other reasons, there are these things called low Earth orbital satellites. These things are LEOs. They're like geosynchronous, except they're really low Earth. They're really close to the surface there. They don't have as large a footprint. They can only be seen by a very small amount of the surface of the Earth. So you need to, if you want to use these LEOs, you need to put a lot of them up. And there are thousands of these things. So these things are just a few hundred kilometers in the sky. They zip by the roofs. These things are good because they're close to the surface. They have very low delays. You can use them for voice, but they wear out. They get tired and they collapse and fall into the Earth. So, yeah. Usually they try to make sure that when they're decaying, when the orbit's decaying, they will steer these things because they're communicating with the satellite. They steer them to fall into the ocean. Hopefully, not hitting the boat or something like that. Or a fish. But every once in a while they crash into someone's house. Then there's something in between these two called middle level orbitals. But there's a whole bunch of satellite technologies. The interesting ones are these LEOs, which are used for phones, and GEOs, which are used for broadcasting TV and high speed, high bandwidth internet, things like that. So these things are kind of the physical layer of connections. Ethernet, the interesting thing about Ethernet is that when Ethernet started out, it was a wired network protocol, that was 2 megabits per second. And it was about 5 times faster than most other wired protocols, wired standards. So people were complaining that Ethernet was at 2 megabits per second too fast. Now that seems a little ridiculous, but at the time it was very expensive, and they said it's very expensive because it's too fast. We use other technologies that are cheaper and do almost as well. Now, you get up into the gigabit range, still not fast enough, but there's always going to be these complaints that the cost of something is just prohibitive. Cost of LEO satellites is pretty expensive. You want to know somebody? walking around with one of these phones that connects up to a satellite. There are some. They're expensive. The service is expensive, but you know, this is what you get when you get the convenience.
Don't all phones with GPSs communicate with satellites?
Yes, they receive. Hopefully you're not transmitting to the GPS satellite. You're receiving something from a GPS satellite, yes. I mean, your watch, there's watches that have GPS receivers. But you're not sending anything. Sending something would be difficult. Then you need to have enough battery power and a big enough antenna. You know, your phone, if you had to carry a big dish around with your phone, you probably should. You know, less than. So there's a lot of these physical layer technologies like wired things, Ethernet or wireless things like Zigbee, and this continues to be even larger. One more thing about this. So regardless of whether it's wired or wireless, usually what these technologies do is to take a carrier wave like this, some kind of carrier, and modulate it somehow. So when you modulate something, there are three reasonable ways to modulate things. You can do what some radios do, and you can modulate radio transmitters do. You can modulate the amplitude. So when you do that, you get something like this. That's AM. You can modulate the frequency. That's FM. And you can modulate the phase. Phase modulation. And phase modulation is really similar to FM. It's behaves very similar. So usually it's AM and FM. Oops, sorry. So these are the way that you modulate a signal, a carrier signal. And this makes it easier to broadcast longer distances and makes it easier to extract information. This is an analog technique. So you're modulating the analog with, you know, the non-discrete value. And then you have to put, somehow you have to put some digital information on that. So that can be done in a few different ways through FM or phase or AM by saying that, you know, the 0 is something close to no signal on AM, and when the power gets large, that's a 1 or something like that, or the inverse of that. So this is kind of a physical layer. Oops, not that. Again, to make networking really work, usually things are divided up into these layers or series of interfaces, just like everything else in operating systems. So at the lowest layer, you have some physical devices that communicate through modulating a wireless signal and modulating a wired signal. Then you've got some, and this is really done in hardware. So the lowest layer, the physical layer, is not really software. But the next layer, the data link layer, is usually associated with that. And the data link layer is software, and it's the software layer that knows about information, that takes a stream of bits and somehow breaks them into packets or groups, and has some addressing. And usually this is kind of viewed as data link communicating with data link. Then there's a network layer. And then there's a bunch of other layers. I guess transport. And then there's the application. So the only ones that are of some interest are really this one here, because this is dictating how you actually communicate physically. Can your phone connect to your light bulb? Does it have the understanding of the right frequencies and how to modulate the signal? That's a physical layer. Data link and network are really important. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And the transport, and then the other layers are not that interesting. We'll skip them. And then there's the application itself. There are other layers, but I won't ask you about those. Session layers. Sessions, establish a connection for some amount of time. What else? So, data link. Gives you some information that is going to be in a fixed size form. Some data links allow some variable up to a couple of hundred bytes or so, variable length and a couple hundred bytes. And some of them say you gotta have exactly this length of 128 bytes or something like that. So depending on which protocol for the data link you use, you either have a fixed size data link packet or something that's pretty small. They're always gonna be relatively small. They have data. They have a small amount of extra overhead to recover for errors. And these are usually CSEs. And they have a series of addresses. Or just headers. And I'll just describe one of the data links that's probably most common. So you have data, you have the bits of the data, the bytes of the data, you have CRC, which is for error recovery, for error detection, not recovery. And then in the header, you've got the source address, destination address, source is who's sending it, destination is who's receiving it. And those can be pretty small, they're just numbers.
The addresses to like the physical.
Yes. And usually there's a sequence number in here, which is really the most interesting part, because the sequence number gives the receiver the ability to reassemble things that somehow get to it out of order, or to notice that if something's missing, there's a missing sequence number. So if the source is sending out, 5, 6, 7, 9, there's a packet missing. And then there's some other junk in here which we won't go into too much detail, which has to do with requests or information about the packet. So this is this other stuff, which again critical right now, is when you're sending something, is this a data packet or is this an information packet, like an error report? Something says the packet's missing or corrupted or something like that. Okay, STEM. Network logic. Put some additional information around those packets. And these are some more addresses, and this is some more error. So what these layers are doing is putting some other additional information out there about, I should just say these beginner headers. And they are information about what kind of packet it is, maybe some priority about the packets, and then some error detecting, but not usually error correcting information about it. And then transport puts some more information around there. Okay, so the thing, again, we do have networking courses if you're interested to go into going the depth of how this works. And in actuality, there's some, this is more of a logical representation of the physical. Physically, the packets are actually a little bit different, but that's what we do networking. The interesting thing here is how the packets actually go through this network. So to go over a local area network, over local area network. The nodes that are receiving something are usually just listening to all of the broadcasts from something being sent. They're not being directed, they're just being broadcast to anything that's sharing this physical network. So all the wireless networks are like this. Wireless doesn't isolate itself two nodes. And quite a few of the wired networks. There are other topologies, there are stars. And there are a couple of others, there's rings. By far the majority now are going to look something like this, either wired or wireless, because it's cheap. So Ethernet and wireless are something like this. They're shared across some physical medium, like the air or wire. These are expensive. Sometimes they're found. These are not very expensive, but they have a big problem that if one of these connectors is broken, you can only go one direction, not the other. And You don't see these too often anymore. It used to be popular like thousands of years ago. You don't see these because they're expensive. You don't see a lot. All right, we have two devices. Oops. Two devices that want to connect. One's interested in sending something to the other, or maybe they're just conversing. They have a dialogue going over a longer distance. So now you don't have a local area network, you have a bigger network. And we'll describe this in terms of the internet. So you have nodes, devices that are connected to something that knows about a larger geographical distance than just a local area network. When you have a local area network here, it's not unusual to have some device that can send things locally over small distances, the switches. When you have something that knows about larger topologies, you have something that knows about something that spans potentially across around the world, and those are routers. Used to be there was a clear distinction between routers and switches, not so much anymore. If you have something that costs a few bucks, you have a switch. If you have something that costs $1,000 bucks, you have a router. However, you know, that's a rough system. So, you want to go over a longer distance. How do routers work? So, this router here is getting information from one node potentially being sent over here. It could be going through another router. Two options here. So some packets can go through this router from this point to this point. Some packets might go through this router. We're deciding on which route should be the route that's followed. So you got lots of routes to walk from however you got here to this route. How'd you choose the route you want? Well, some people choose the shortest. Some people might choose the shortest that they don't have to walk through a wall or jump over a building or something like that. So it's the shortest plus a few limitations about getting there. And some people just say the fastest route may not be the shortest, but it may be the fastest. Fastest doesn't necessarily mean the shortest route.
I mean
Fastest in time. Yeah, I mean, most people go for fast, not necessarily short. So, so routers generally prefer to do things in terms of time than the fastest route. So they're trying to measure things in terms of what is the response time of the next location. There are, originally there were a few hundred routers on the internet. Now there's a few million routers on the internet. How do you scale from a few hundred to a few million? When you have a few hundred, you can have every router know about all the other routers. And up until 15 years ago, you could get a list of all the routers on the internet and where they were connected. Now, you probably can't. At that time, and it wasn't that long ago, it was this century, it wasn't that difficult to draw a diagram of all of the routers. Now, so how do routers actually know how to route? How do they know where this end destination is? So that light bulb wants to send some information to that phone. That phone wants to send something to your refrigerator. How do they know where each of those items are, those end destination receivers are? No. They don't need to. So the nice thing about this scheme is routers don't need to know about anything past one hop. It just has to know how to get from here to here, here, and here, or from here to here and here. Just one hop away. And then one hop away knows how to get to the next hop. The next hop knows how to get to the next hop. That's how that works.
But like, if you're at a node and you have 3 nodes to choose from, what protocol tells you what node to choose?
You know, like this. So you have 3 choices here. So, or really, in most cases you have 2. So if you receive from one, don't send it back to the same one. So you have these 2 choices. So what you do is you keep measuring how long it takes to get from here to here in the acknowledgement. And every router has to acknowledge it's been receiving packets, so if something gets lost, it doesn't acknowledge. So basically what's done here is that this router will choose the one that's fastest to respond. Pretty much that's it. If you were to take a networking class 3 years ago, not 3 years ago, they used to say there's a queue of packets coming in here, and this queue gets decided on by this router, deciding whether to send to this node or this node. Now you don't want a queue. That just slows things down. So if you can't send it out immediately, throw it away. And whoever sent it to you is going to notice that you didn't respond, and it will find it. So that's kind of what networking is like. Now, anything else? Let's say one more thing about this. Since almost always you're going to be connected to some sort of local area network before you send something through a long haul network to internet. You're going to be in one of these topologies, almost always in this one. You're sharing things with other people, wireless or wired. What keeps someone from receiving packets that you send and looking for something interesting? In other words, on your Bluetooth or your Wi-Fi or Zigbee or whatever it is that you have wireless, or even wired, what keeps somebody from listening in on your conversations? Nothing. Right. So, if they can get the frequency, if they can physically connect, you can listen. So you can't really expect that there is anything like anonymity There is the possibility that you can do things to give you some privacy, but anonymity is probably not reasonable right now, not reasonable as a limitation. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Security. Security is a real problem when you go to network. It's enough about networking. Security.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What is it specifically that an internet service provider is doing? Is it just giving you access to their WAN?
They just give you access to their physical, local end of the network, plus they pay a little bit into the longer haul network. I should point out that, the prices you pay to your internet service providers, your ISPs, in the US are really expensive. I mean, here at the university, hopefully you're not paying. But your home network is probably 10 times more expensive than other places that have a decent. Why? Money.
Not enough competition.
Yeah, because there's very little competition. Because if there is competition, you buy out your competitors. That may change someday in the future. 200 years from now, 500 years from now. But if you look at the prices that people pay for internet service in other places, that's really a fraction of what you pay. Security. Once you connect to the network, you have problems with people trying to watch what you're doing on the network, local area or wide area networks. So there's a few different parts of security that are really kind of critical. One of them is, can you somehow keep the information that you're sending and receiving private? The other one is, can you do that in a way that you can not be known by anyone else watching? That's anonymity. So there's privacy. Neither of which were done very well when networking was first being set up. Obviously, there's now lots of people who are trying to find out information about what you're sending or who you are, and we'll discuss some of those issues. To begin with, security was a problem even before networking was very prevalent. But if you never connect your computer to any other device, you never network to anything, then the only way you have security problems is somebody somehow gives you software that you put on your computer, which occasionally happens. I didn't bring the guy who did the security talk to us.
I think you did. You brought a guy, and I can't remember what, he won a competition?
Yes.
That's the guy?
Yeah. He wanted to talk a little bit about it. So his estimate, he's been doing some research in security. There's a few people doing research in security. The estimates are that there are in the tens of millions of dollars of theft through computer security. Some of it is through directly influencing something on the network, like through a bank or through a financial institution, and some of it through other mechanisms. There's also cybersecurity attacks. Those are probably should be a little bit scary. So, why are there security problems?
People want to steal.
Well, that's one part.
Or mess with you.
Yes.
Or experiment.
Or what?
Experiment.
Well, okay, so experimenting, yeah, there's some amount of that. The vast majority of security issues are because people are trying to steal something. But there are now these cybersecurity attacks attacking infrastructure things, or countries, or parts of countries. So the largest attack, I guess I should say, no attack, because there are constantly attacks, was one that cost a little bit over $1 billion, probably a couple of $1 billion. So, that was not stealing $2 billion, because that would be kind of hard to do. It was destroying equipment that was about worth $2 billion. Do you know what this is? You know what the largest security, cybersecurity attack was?
Does that have to do with printers?
$2 billion worth of printers? That's a big lie.
Printer.
Was this the one where someone plugged in the flash drive that found on the parking lot?
$2 billion?
There was an attack where someone plugged in the flash drive that found the parking lot. And it did-
Yes, that happens a lot. Yes, okay, so one thing is, I guess that's a good place to start. If you find a flash drive in the parking lot, don't plug it in. There are those attacks. There are known nation-state attacks where someone will put malware on a pretty nice USB drive, leave it in parking lots of defense companies, hoping that somebody plugs it in.
Some
Which of course does happen.
Some smart criminals will go to like business conventions in particular industries, and they'll hand out their flash drives
Yes,
by
they
the
will.
dozens, and then people will plug them in at some point.
And they will do that, yes. Because given a really expensive high-end flash drive, you would be tempted to plug it in. But this one wasn't done by a flash drive. This was done by a network attack. This was a famous one. I'll just mention it because it's the famous attack. So it's doesn't matter. And this is interesting because it's kind of characteristic of what cyber attacks look like. Stuxnet was an attack that was clearly aimed towards one country, which was trying to refine uranium. They had centrifuges that were spinning around refining radioactive material so they could most likely build atomic weapons. They're not that good. Atomic weapons are bad. I mean, they can really mess up your day. This is a country that didn't have atomic weapons and said that they weren't going to have any, but had several $1 billion worth of centrifuges which spin around at really high speeds to refine nuclear material. So there was some software, some malware that was somehow was put onto this network of centrifuges, which caused the centrifuges to spin a little bit faster than normal, which was burning them up. And then it would slow down. Then it would speed up and burn them up a little bit more, it would slow down a little bit, speed up, and cause probably $2 billion worth of damage. The country that was attacked has never really admitted that they were attacked, but they were really upset about it, apparently. The countries that did attack them, or whoever did attack them, has never really publicly said that they did the attack. There's endless guesses at who it was. But like lots of malware attacks, anybody can claim that they did it. Or anybody can claim somebody else did it. So it's not really that clear who the authors of the software were, but they're really smart. You can, I should point out, if you're interested, you can actually download this and look at it. It is very well done. It's an amazing piece of malware from a technical view. Don't run it on your essential users if you're
Finding their aim.
or mining Bitcoin or something like that. This thing could be pretty devastating. But you can look at it. It was discovered by accident. It cost probably $2 billion worth of damage. It set back the nuclear ambitions of the country by a few years, probably, most likely, and really upset them. And in the few years since this attack, lots of countries have been interested in developing similar kinds of things. If you're interested, you can look this up. I'll just say couple more things about this. You can't really believe whoever the claims are about who wrote this software. You can maybe kind of suspect who it was, but can't really be sure who it was. The group that's usually associated with writing this kind of malware and that's believed to have written it, some of the people in that group in that country have job offers. And I was just reading that if you want to make around, the job offers are around $100,000 a month. So if you're looking for a job, pay about $100,000 a month. More than that.
Yeah.
More than 100,000. Do you know how much 100,000 a month is? It's pretty good.
It's like 0-day flaws in Windows. Like, that's pretty useful.
Yes, they did find 0-day flaws, 0-day vulnerabilities, or somebody discovering something that has not yet been reported. They did discover 0-day vulnerabilities. They are worth something, but they're usually not worth $100,000 a month. Well, like I said, if you do discover these vulnerabilities yourself, you should probably inform Windows, or Linux, or Macs that you found these things, rather than go off and sell them or attack it. But these guys get paid. On the other side, you probably are targeting yourself, because there's also people who try to kill the writers. Why wouldn't you? So, for $100,000, you're putting yourself at risk.
Dangerous man.
Sorry?
Dangerous man.
Yeah. Okay, so there are different kinds of attacks. Stuxnet was one of these malware that was deliberately targeting just a very narrow group of devices. There's also attacks that try to attack certain operating systems. And applications within an operating system. Or I should say, operating systems and devices. And applications, and then things that are data sensitive. So the attacks against operating systems and devices are things that attack your phone, that try to put malware or some kind of software on your phone to disrupt or steal something. So the most common things are, of course, to steal money. But occasionally you'll see some kind of malware, some kind of software that will be on your phone to steal pictures off your phone. Always the world's richest person at the time got attacked with something on his phone. You know who are the richest people in the world? Oh, there's one of those, yeah. Got something on his phone to steal some of the pictures off his phone, and then he was blackmailed. Don't do that. Again, point out that there are lots of ways to exploit vulnerabilities on phones or computers. Some of these things are not very sophisticated. If you can attack the world's richest person who's very technologically sophisticated, most people will also. Then there are things that attack applications, especially databases, but also cloud, and distributed computing, and things that go directly to data sources. There used to be these things called viruses and Trojan horses. And I'll just briefly describe them. So a virus is very much like a human virus. It infects another program. Viruses, human viruses infect cells, and software viruses infect or change the behavior of the program. Trojan horses, based on a very famous story about somebody wanting to give this giant wooden horse to somebody as a favor. If there's a hint, somebody trying to give you a giant wooden horse, don't take it. So Trojan horses are something that looks like something else and it's disguised as part of something else. Trojan horse is very common when you download software that's not verified, that you may get something else riding along with it. That's not a virus because it hasn't infected some executable, but it is associated with something else. So, free downloads or something probably is suspicious. Of course. And worms are ways to deploy something from one node, one computer to another. These are now probably archaic terms because most attacks combine some of these. So you have a virus plus a worm, or a virus plus a Trojan horse, or a Trojan horse plus a worm plus a virus. And now it's just malware. So the effort is to stop malware from being disseminated, and if you can somehow pick up malware to get rid of it. But unfortunately, malware comes in lots of ways. As you point out, in security terms, security classes and things like that, malware is just part of what you discuss. So, if anything, this discussion about networking should encourage you to take a networking class. We have a few. Discussion about security should encourage you to take a security class. We also do those. If you're wondering what security class to take, there's a class called Security 1, which is kind of this issue about how malware work and how you stop things from getting onto your system. And there's another security class that this is the prerequisite for called security programming, which is how do you write software that is less attackable? In terms of this security issue, so malware is one issue. Being attacked is an issue. But what is it that you can do other than directly identifying things as malware to keep attacks away from the computer?
Can restrict access to certain pieces of data on your computer.
Yes, okay. You have a computer and you're attached to things over a network. Ideally, you want to prevent malware from ever reaching your computer or ever getting into your computer, so you can set up something that can filter out some things that look suspicious. Those are firewalls. If you don't have anything else to protect your computer against attacks from the network, setting up a software firewall is a good start. Software firewalls are software that runs on your local computer, on your phone, to block suspected, the things that are suspected as being bad. If you're more paranoid, and the more security classes you take, the more paranoid you should be. Like if you take one security class, you should be very worried. Then you can actually get physical firewalls. They're very cheap. So a physical firewall is putting things in an isolated box that's separate from your computer. That makes it somewhat harder to attack. Some people will argue that having a separate firewall, a separate device from your computer is overkill, or that if you don't update the firewall, it's also vulnerable because you don't keep your firewall active and you don't keep it updated, then it's no better than having it as part of your computer. Which I think is exactly. Firewalls block things on packet basis, usually from restricted IP addresses. So they actually look at the IP address, the Internet Protocol address, network address, and block things. Because of the way spoofing works, and that addresses don't really indicate where something actually came from, they may not work very well based on that. They may have to look more at the contents of packets. Firewalls can do that too. So, this idea of how firewalls work, how they can stop some kinds of attacks against the computer, this is part of InfoSec 1. One part of security is how do you keep data secure? And we'll expand that a little bit more to these things that are roughly called passwords. Which is authentication. And hashes. So there's lots of other important parts of security other than just encrypting things or hashing things. There's levels of authorization. How much do you want to grant to other devices or other parts of the system? Do you want to restrict what applications can access your data? Those are important, but these are probably the most valuable. Password authentication. How do you authenticate yourself? The most common is this login password combination. That's not the only way to do it. Login and password is easy because it's textual, because you can type it on the keyboard. There's also logins with some other thing that associates itself with your name, identity, and that is you can do fingerprints, you can do eye scans, you can do blood testing, DNA. Some of those things are a little bit invasive. For example, having to give your blood every time you log in, kind of considered painful. But there's even more serious problems with that. Iris scans, scanning your eye. That's kind of also kind of invasive, but maybe less so than getting blood. There's fingerprints. The problem with these biometric things is if they are taken away, if they're stolen, somebody gets your fingerprint or your iris or your blood, how do you change it? So if you're using your fingerprint as a login, and somehow somebody gets your fingerprint, and you've seen how they do that. There's lots of physical ways to get a copy of your fingerprint. How do you change your fingerprints? You can scrape off your fingerprints and get new ones. Okay, that's not really that good a solution. So biometric things, which unfortunately seem to be really popular in certain groups, are notoriously bad. So you do see things like fingerprints being now used as ID for various things. That's going to be a disaster soon if it's not already a disaster, because it can't be revoked. The longest passwords work. How secure is the password?
Pretty secure.
Okay,
Depending on
so
how you-
if you have 26 letters in your alphabet, and you do upper and lower case, and then add a few numbers to it. For one single letter, you have 26 plus 26 plus 10 different combinations for one letter password, which is about 62. Sorry?
And symbols.
Yeah, then you can add some symbols, some punctuation, and something like that. You can get maybe 70 or 80 different possibilities. If you have 2 of those, then you have that to that squared. If you have 8, a string of 8 letters and numbers, then this that to the 8th. So this gives you the number of possible combinations. In the days past, that was 8 letters, 8 combinations of letters and numbers was fine. But with things that can generate millions of combinations per second, that's probably not good enough. So, one of the problems with passwords is people use common words or names as passwords. How does it stop you from using a word as your password? so the problem is that people use common words, so it's not really gonna be 62 to the eighth, it's really gonna be much fewer if you're guessing that people are using common words. So if you're interested, there are the 10,000 most common words in English, which you can download. There's only 10,000. Most people don't use 10,000 words. And if you think you can be smarter by using a different language, Spanish, there's the 10,000 most common Spanish words, and the 10,000 most common Hindi words, Telugu words, French words, or most of the common languages. So, how do you prevent a dictionary-based attack? Just guessing words.
You add a delay every time you try to log in, or limit the number of attempts.
Those are the two most reasonable ways to do it. Okay, so the number of combinations is just not large enough if people are using words. That's why it's good to have a mixture of letters and words that don't form letters and characters that don't form words. But you can do this by, as you say, limiting the number of attempts. Someone can guess 10 times and then block them out. Or perhaps more commonly, they guess 10 times and then you have a delay of about 10 minutes. If they guess 5 more times and they still don't guess it right, you delay for an hour. So you just slow down the process. So it makes it harder to break it. There are other things other than logins and letters and numbers as passwords. There's certificates, which I'll just mention. And certificates are usually pushed to you by a web server of some sort and they're stored locally. Certificates have some duration. Usually they're good for a few hours. If it's a system that really is concerned about security, like a bank, certificates are good for an hour. It's a system that's not too worried about PTA, certificates are good for a year. Yeah, I think they're a year. But we don't worry about security. But banks do. Okay, a little bit about hashing. So you have a large message. And you want to somehow condense that down into a really small value of, say, 64 bits or something around that size that doesn't have the same information but has some unique description about that. It's called hashes. So a simple hash would just be you add all of the bytes of the message together and you get a hash. Or you multiply them together. But you have to keep truncating this thing so you don't get an overflow. So these things are hashes that can be, and they're usually somewhere between 64 bits to 256 bits long. So you don't have the same information, but you have some thumbprint or synopsis of what you have. Hashes are the most important thing in security because they give you ways to detect that the message hasn't been altered. So when you're doing transactions or something with security in mind, you want to have a hash. When you download software, when you download it in Linux, there's usually a hash with that. And you can recompute the hash to make sure that nothing has been modified. Did you do that? No, of course not. Why would you? But you should have done that because that's the security aspects of making sure that your Linux didn't get somehow modified. Hashes are really important. There are a couple of different kinds of hashing that are really of the key here. One of them is the hashing that you hopefully learned in some class that you took. 2020? Didn't you talk about hashes? But those were not secure hashes. Then there are the secure hashes, the cryptographic hashes, which usually make it more difficult. Okay. Okay, I guess before we go to encryption, I should say something about these things. How do you store passwords? Not on your computer, but how should an operating system store hashes? Oh, sorry, store passwords. Hashes. Why hashing? Why not just store the password?
It's too easily interpreted.
Because if you store a password, people are going to look for it. If you encrypt the password, people will figure out how to decrypt the password. So, do you need to store this password? Not really. So what you really need is to hash the password. So passwords are not actually stored, they're hashed into something that is unrecoverable. Hashes can't be recovered. The manipulations that go on to hashing can't go backwards. Otherwise, you could store a really big message into a really tiny amount of space. So hashes are the way for passwords.
So when you attempt the password, is it then hashing that is comparing the results?
Compare the hash. Yes. All right, encryption. There's two kinds of encryptions that are really common. One of them is called a symmetric key or one key, or symmetric, which is you have a message and you have a key, and these are combined to give you an encrypted message. And to decrypt it, use the same key to decrypt it that you use to encrypt it. Usually, this is the message, you do some kind of exclusive OR here, exclusive OR and a few shifts, and you get an encrypted message. This is the one key or symmetric encryption. The very famous way to do this is called DES, Data Encryption Standard, which uses a 56-bit key. But 56 bits long ago was fine, now it's too small, so now you probably want to use two of them. And there's a few other ones, but most of them are called something S. So there's AES and a bunch of other newer methods of doing this, and they're one key or something. Then there are the two keys. Or asymmetric. Or public-private. So you encrypt something with a public key. And decrypt it with a private key. These are tremendously slow. However, they do have the advantage of having one key that everybody can use to encrypt a message to you, and having a private key that only you can use to encrypt. You don't want to use this for very much encryption. These are 20, 50,000 times slower than the other encryption. But they're pretty interesting. So usually they're not commonly used for encrypting large amounts, really to encrypt something really small. Usually the key that you're going to send back and forth. There is another nice feature of this. Sometimes people will encrypt with a private key, and somebody else can decrypt with a public key. Why would they do that? That's a digital signature. That's a way of signing something digital. So just by reversing it, okay, so, Monday. Wednesday, you don't want to have class on Wednesday. You do want to have class on Wednesday?
I'm asking about the exam.
Yeah.
What chapters is it?
I don't know, so chapter 7 is the last exam.
Chapter 7, so it doesn't include anything on the last exam, right?
Does not include anything on the last exam. Chapter 7 is the last exam. I don't remember what chapter 7 are, I'll look in.
And then up till what we just covered?
Plus, of course, maybe an assignment or two. That's it. That's a short exam. So, you want a hint? You want a hint?
One best question.
One normal size question. I had to shrink the font down to like 3 points.
One